Resource-based conflicts are often described as security problems, questions of force, deployment, and control. But long before violence breaks out, something else has already failed: meaning, trust, and governance. In this episode, I'm joined by Brigadier General Saleh Bala, retired officer, peacekeeper, policy advisor, and now a thinker and teacher of security governance. Drawing on decades of experience across Nigeria and within the United Nations system, we explore why kinetic responses so often fall short, how narratives become operational terrain, and what non-kinetic security actually demands of institutions and societies. This is a conversation about restraint, responsibility, and the difficult work of building peace when force alone can no longer carry the weight. Brigadier General Saleh Bala, retired, is a Nigerian security governance expert and strategic communication specialist with over 3 decades of experience across military service, peacekeeping, and national policy advisory roles. Commissioned into the Nigerian Army in 1984, he served in senior positions including as Chief of Staff of the Nigerian Army Infantry Corps and as Military Chief of Staff of the UN operation in Côte d'Ivoire. He later advised Nigeria's Minister of Interior on policy and strategy. General Bala holds degrees in literature, international peace studies, and national security strategy, and is the founder of the White Ink Institute for Strategy, Education and Research, WISER, with a focus on non-kinetic security responses, conflict dynamics, and strategic communications. General, you've spent decades inside the formal security institutions, and now you largely work outside uniformed command. When you look at Nigeria's internal security challenges today, what do you think you see more clearly now than you did while you were in service?
Well, with the benefit of actually long service in the military and that we've had God's blessing and life to survive this long, to be in the civilian realm, there is really a lot of reflection that one has. Growing up in the military up through my subaltern years before I became a senior officer, actually went to War College and understood by training how the whole dynamics of national security is. It was easy then as a more junior officer to just assume that the military solution is the overarching and assured solution to dealing with internal strife. But the War College actually puts you through all the elements that constitute national development, national security, I beg your pardon, to the point that you actually will get to understand that defense and security, when I say security, I mean law enforcement and even intelligence, is simply, they are institutions simply made to securitize development itself and human security, which compose of all the human necessities and needs which the social contract establishes between citizens and government. So I also grew to learn that defense and security is more, speaking in terms of happenings today, the military kinetic solution is more a palliative than the more enduring solution to peace and security.
Thank you for that, sir. I'll take on the last thing that you said. The phrase non-kinetic security is often misunderstood as a weakness. It's called a soft approach, as an abstraction. So from your experience, what does it actually mean in practice? And why is it more important than the way we see it as, as a failing, as something soft, something collateral?
The non-kinetic approach becomes the non-kinetic approach because it is mainly development and peace building. which even without conflict and crisis is supposed to be the first attempt and the first responsibility of government, to provide for those essentials that assure for social justice, to assure for all those very essential human daily needs that are supposed to address address and secure the human composition of a nation. What are these? Social justice, that when there is a dispute or a crisis, which, as you know, conflict, crisis, disputes are second nature.
Inevitable.
They're inevitable, and they're a fact of life, even within the individual. If it is within the individual is able to resolve that by the mechanisms within that a person is able to endure and find causes out of what this conflict or personal crisis are. When it scales up to the group or community circumstance, that there are institutions or leaderships that are able to provide for mediations, for negotiations, and for solution finding. It could, to the extent of restitutions, to the by way of fines, by way of levies, and so on and so forth. By, in fact, multi-track diplomacy is also within non-kinetic efforts. We must also remember that development forms up to 80% of the activities that assure peace and stability. Because you are able to, again, ensure social justice, you are able to provide those necessary infrastructure, establish those institutions that provide for the well-being of the people. Okay? Is it majorly the major dispute element, which is across human society? Is it land usage? Is it the land resources usage? That there is a mechanism which ensures fair, equitable use of those natural resources across individuals, communities, and even cross-regional and national and international spheres. So the non-kinetic effort is very much all about those measures that I've listed severally to ensure social justice and to ensure that disputes are resolved without even the use of enforcement, which is in the ambit of the tripod of the criminal justice system, the judiciary, the police, and the correctional. That we're able to resolve these issues without applying force, whether it is law enforcement or it is the kinetic effort, which is implementing arms at whatever scale. So this is clearly the description of what kinetic efforts are from non-kinetic efforts.
I like that framing, because it frames non-kinetic efforts as actually closer to what the responsibilities of the state are to its citizens, and then the kinetic efforts come in when there's a breakdown of that of that dynamic.
And when there is conflict.
And when
it is violent conflict, or where justice needs to be served, or when the law needs to be protected and enforced.
You mentioned issues of land and issues on the environment. Many land and water disputes begin as very practical disagreements between people, between communities, but they often escalate into ethnic or religious violence. So here's my question. At what point do these conflicts stop being about resources and their management and become about identity?
Simply, number one is the issue of dominance of the majority over the minority. Okay. There is also, interestingly, the tyranny of the minority who have the most voice and elite reach across political, cultural, and social boundaries. So it is not a one-fit description that it is always the majority that oppress the minority in the effort to exploit resources. So also there is geographical domination. However small a group is, if they have the primacy of control over resources, they also can exert authority and influence of exploitation, even over those who are in the majority. You remember the colonial days? Right here in our colonial environment, it was few colonial masters who were lords upon us because they willed power.
Yes.
They willed power, and it is mostly, again, kinetic power that they are able to, by force, create laws that suppress and oppress us. So at what point do these conflicts transform into land-based resource conflicts transform into violence? It is at the point where citizens feel excluded, feel oppressed, feel deprived, and the need for them to express themselves strongly to the point of asserting themselves and seizing up their rights to what otherwise is theirs.
Now, at the community level, as well as the regional and the national level, Nigeria has various early warning systems, such as peace committees, as well as intelligence channels.
Absolutely.
But violence always seems to surprise us. We're always caught on the back foot. In your view, why do warning signals so often fail to translate into early preventive action?
Interestingly, this is not, the answer I'm going to give is not special to Nigeria. The world itself, the politics of the world, the internal politics of the world, and even international politics is actually, as much as there is so much expenditure into intellectualism, but governance is hardly intellectually driven. So with all the information that is being mined, democracy or any other form of government is elite-driven. It's all about interest. And we are beginning to see a rise of a less reading society, as well as governance, as well as people in government. How much time do they actually have to go through documents, to go through long briefings that will lead them to different options through which to implement solutions? That is at the intellectual level. At the effort level, resources are really very scarce.
Yeah.
Is it the military resource? Is it the law enforcement resource? Is it even the basic and major civil service resource that are supposed to be orchestrated to deal with the information that is gathered, all the data that is mined, in order to provide for the enduring developmental energy that will ensure that at the information level, long before the conflict manifests into a physical sense, that there are developmental measures that are brought in to forestall the escalation to violence. This is basically what the problems are. Whatever good intention a government has, it is as much to it also, it serves elite interest. Okay? Because conflict itself is a huge minefield. is a huge resource field, because you definitely have heard of conflict entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Because the more there is conflict,
Yes.
there is more. The more there are opportunities for expenditure. There are opportunities for elites to become overnight leaders and opinion makers around which people will look up to. So there is also the elite component that pushes several credible efforts that are made through these early warning systems, through research, through briefings and information resourced from all these kinds of material that are gathered. But what is the elite interest? What is the executive time amongst leaders? What is their political interests in really analyzing this conflict, and with an open mind through the justice, the formal justice, and the multi-track conflict resolution systems to deal with all these disputes before they actually become conflicts and even the violent ones?
Yeah, so I think I find this fascinating, all right? So an interesting aspect of this is the disconnect or misconnection between the elite interest and the interests of the people. Nonetheless, the elite themselves are propped up by the very people. So it's an interesting relationship, which we can analyze in several ways. But from a systems perspective, when you look at the entire system, where do you think the state most consistently diagnoses the nature of resource-based conflicts? What does it think it's responding to versus what it is actually responding to? The underlying issues and the effects of those underlying issues.
Well, the system, if one calls it the system, otherwise the government, as much as they have the overarching responsibility and the constitutional responsibility, so to speak, to ensure peace and stability. But the matter of elite interest also counts, and there is also strategic blindness, which happens when there is the emergence of crisis, especially a mosaic of crisis, which causes distraction over periods of time to strategically concentrate on dealing with one crisis. As you are trying to deal with Boko Haram, suddenly banditry pops up. As you are trying to do that, you also know that there is an election coming up. Okay? Yeah. You also know that there is an election coming up. There is a chieftaincy issue which you need to deal with. Teachers are on strike. Universities are closing down. So it is the nature of the rapidness along which crisis actually pops up. The instinct is always to deal first to ensure that violence is stemmed. And the effort to stem violence consumes a lot of resources. Yeah. From time, from financial capacity, manpower, and all of it. Because if you are not able to provide, again, that palliative, which is the kinetic effort, yeah. If you are not able to provide that kinetic effort, which will generate that gulf that you need of stability for you to implement other issues, to implement the developmental non-kinetic effort, to deal in an enduring manner the crises that are coming up. Lots of other more crises are creeping in. So there is the problem of strategic concentration, strategic discipline in implementation and in even thought. So basically that is it. But mostly it is about political interest, and you can aggregate it You can disaggregate it, firstly, into political interest, into ethno-religious elite interests, into sociocultural interests, and even industry. Because the more conflicts there are, as you know, the military and defense and law enforcement procurement are the most easy way of making tons and tons of money. And also, there is the corruption. There is the corruption angle to it all. So, as a systems dilemma, firstly, is the rapidity at which crises pop. And also, unfortunately, there isn't the discipline, the training, and professionalism amongst politicians who, interestingly, in democracy, have the primacy of power in governance in any nation. Their attention is mostly focused on the next election, on how much is to be made to pursue the next election, on how it should be politically convenient for X community to be protected, for X community to be labeled, and all those kind of tensions that are within the framework. But as you also know, there is a lot of effort outside government, more effort outside government, in mining information, intelligence, so to speak, in supporting the effort at finding peace and stability among communities.
Narratives are not just background noise. Whether it's the elite shaping these narratives, minorities, majorities, narratives are not just background noise. They are the actual operational terrain. So I'm going to ask concerning misinformation, all right? How does misinformation or the framing choice, whether by elites or by victims themselves, alter security outcomes on the ground?
The human is essentially an emotional element, is an emotional composition. You know much more a feeling of what affects you. Who feels it knows it. And to the extent to which, as a human being, you want to covet sympathy, through that you are able to shape a narrative that will be favorable to your defense of your position. So whether it is at the intellectual scale or it is at the simple community storytelling level, there are lots of sentiments and emotions being used to couch and create narratives. So it is important at the human level to understand that. But at also what level do we humans understand the damage that our narratives can cause? This is where the problem is. So when you scale it to the level that we are talking about, we all know in the past, in international relations, in wars, in international wars among communities, in international conflict, who owns the story and who gets the story out and who is consistent on telling the story gains most of the sympathy. Remember, I established that the human being is a very emotive being.
Yes.
So you are able to sway as much majority as you can to your side. Government is made of people.
True.
Government is made of people. So this affects the human, that touches the human element. And in most decisions that are also made, you will find out that it is humans who sit within executive councils, who sit in parliaments, and unfortunately, even sit on the bar and the bench to make such decisions. Even within the judiciary. We see not just in Nigeria, not pointing fingers only on Nigeria. Internationally, we've seen certain cases that are decided which clearly are based on emotive reasons. So this is where now you have the disconnect, and this is where calls for leadership to be responsible. To ensure that as the statue that represents the law, that the law is blind, that the law hones a scale and cuts and ensures that the scale is balanced. But this is where really patriotic, altruist, and strong leadership across the various sectors are required, that leaders are able to, without giving examples, so I don't contradict issues, but it takes for a leader to be above the ordinary human in order to see through narratives. Yeah. And also because narratives are very important.
Absolutely.
That the proper narratives that will unite, that will stabilize and unite people and ensure that through social justice measures that people are united, that people are restituted, and also the various rights, whether majority or minority, are protected.
I think I'm going to take you up on narratives and counter narratives. Over the last few years, over the last 10, 15 years, security institutions have often tried counter narratives with messaging campaigns. But often than not, this has failed, and we've seen this with the continuing series of conflicts, which you have spoken about. Why do counter narratives fail when they begin to sound like public relations? And more importantly, what distinguishes a credible narrative intervention from propaganda?
Towards when I became a senior officer, I took the interest in knowing what this new thing that was coming up around information management and dissemination called strategic communication. Yeah. And I learned by definition that strategic communications is actually leadership driven, and it is about the use of words, symbols, actions in order to influence behavior. This is what strategic communication is, which is away from my training as a special forces operative, at which my college crest, if you go to the United States John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and School crest, it is in 3 colors: black, gray, and white. And these are representations of the colors of how propaganda is couched. Propaganda could be white. It could be white to such as to speak the truth, but with an interest to control. It is also gray, which will be an in-between with the next color, which is black. The black propaganda of Goebbels is clearly black.
Yes.
Okay? And the gray one is an in-between of it. But basically, those were the years of propaganda. Yet, even with strategic communications, what still remains consistent is what effort in strategic communication that is being made is in order to control behavior, either individual or group behavior. As strategic communication is growing, we are realizing also that it has become a commercial outlet in using symbols, words, and actions, which are captured through several types of media and communicated to people. by leaders in order to control their behavior. So essentially, we are seeing a return to the days of propaganda, yet you have a sexified terminology called strategic communications.
Yeah.
And you also would have heard that you would have been hearing that there is no morality in strategy, that the ends justifies the means. So if the end is to justify the means, that you are able to, through gray communication, to be able to even tell a victim, to convince a victim that you are actually not the victim. Okay? That the so-termed oppressor is actually the victim, because you are able to propagate to a greater extent the grievances of the oppressor. Unfortunately, government, which is supposed to be a prime mover of narratives, of counter-narratives, I beg your pardon, which is supposed to be, government that is supposed to be a prime mover of counter-narratives, unfortunately, is always a respondent. And this is why it is counter narrative.
Yes.
It is not within the realms of reaching the public first with information.
Yeah.
You find that delay.
Yeah, it's second.
Government is always second, is always reactionary.
Yes.
Is always reacting to information that would have come out of communities.
Yeah.
And probably mostly not mostly out of communities, but from civil society organizations.
And elite groups.
Elite groups are all part of civil society.
Yeah.
But most of all, the organized civil society, through their funding organizations, will always speak towards the interest of the funder. And this is where you have the abuse of the strategic communication systems. But even within that, you have credible outlets that are able to speak to balance, that are able to reject certain material or the development of certain material that are not true, that rather exacerbate the problem or throws up false narrative that worsen what otherwise is the crisis or the conflict.
If we set aside the ideal outcomes for a moment, what does success realistically look like in managing Nigeria's resource-based conflicts over the next 1 or 2 years?
I don't know about success, okay? Because if we are to speak about success, we are talking about ending conflicts completely. That it doesn't happen. Consistently through life, not just conflict. Human life itself progressively is through the management. That's why in conflict studies you talk about conflict management and peace building. That consistently we're able to provide those services that are able to mitigate, reduce conflicts. Because eliminating conflicts is as the ability to eliminate human emotions and sentiments. And that feeling of deprivation, of that feelings of inequality, of that feeling of repression, and all those other things that manifest in the grudges and grievances of people. But to ensure that where there is a grudge, and it is expressed, that an appropriate social justice framework, whether it is the formal or the multi-tract, is able to mitigate, to ensure that it doesn't escalate into violence, and that people are able to see that when they have a misunderstanding, even at that level, at the primary level of a misunderstanding, that there is a system that listens to them, that builds that trust. Because essentially it's all about trust and the loss of it and the lack of it. That consistently people who are responsible from the levels of the political government to elites in various sectors of society, to traditional rulers, to journalists, to the formed civil society, that there is consistent responsibility to ensure that the narratives that are developed are aimed towards the best for human interaction, relationship, and also to ensure that the deprived is restituted and their rights are also protected. So what should the government do? Is to use to the best that can, that is altruist but difficult, that politics is restricted to politicking. It is very, very easy to hear people talk about, let us deal with it through a political solution. What does political solution really mean? Just like this complex and nebulous term, which is flung all over the place, the political will. What is this political will about? But all these usages with the term political is in respect and respond to the acceptance of what a democratic system is. That it is a system that sits on political mechanisms, and that politicians, for as much, will be able to use these mechanisms to ensure social justice for the people, to ensure that they use politics to provide for social amenities, to provide for dealing with disputes. So until we're able to understand that politics is actually for the service of the people, and the best of the people cannot be achieved if amongst the various peoples and communities that there is no peace, some measurable peace and stability. That these people that we are vested with the responsibility of leading. We can only be leaders where there are the people. Just like we commonly say in the military, you cannot be a commissioned officer where there are no NCOs. So it is to understand that leadership comes with responsibility. So unless we are able to understand this, and actually as leaders at various sectors of society, know that this responsibility for stability and peace is a divine responsibility for those of us of faith, that the entrustment of people into your responsibility is divine, and that you have a constitutional responsibility that you have sworn to be able to protect them and serve them. So back to your question, it is not black and white. It is to the extent that there is concerted, altruist effort to the human extent that leaders of the various sectors are able to provide governance that is even at the baseline of humanism, where as humans we are all equals. This, I see, is how we will have a good measure of peace and stability in Nigeria. Over the kinds of conflicts that we have, it's all about elite capture and the elite effort, to garner resources to themselves. This is all what it is. So it's to ensure that the law is also very, very effective. That the law is not at elite levels or at stratas, directed to stratas of the society. Okay, that he who steals a goat goes to prison for 10 years, and who steals billions
local government funds
comes to negotiation,
yes.
Comes to what is it called?
Plea bargains.
Comes to plea bargain and actually sits on it and decides how much he or she returns to society. This is where the problem is. Unless we are able to rise to such levels where the law is effective to the extent that is humanly possible, and how we are able to develop an egalitarian society, where sometimes you live and you don't even need government, but government is there to protect you.
Yeah, to back you up.
To back you up. This is the effort we should be making to ensure enduring peace and stability.
Okay, I'd like to take you up on peace building.
Yes.
What is the one thing Nigeria consistently misunderstands about peace building? Something that keeps us locked in these reactive, force-heavy responses. Whenever anything happens, it's police. No, send soldier. Both the state and the victims always want force-heavy. They want soldier. If they can't get soldiers, they want more. What is it that keeps us locked in these very reactive, force-heavy responses to all types of conflicts?
It's a long story, but I'll make it short because it comes with our historical background. We are a people where the royalty is at the prime of society, where you serve royalty, and everything in fact is for the royalty, which grew to become to the state, to the sovereign, and to the sovereignty. The sovereign is a representation of the sovereignty, and for no reason, the sovereign has rights. In those days, a sovereign can even claim your wife.
Claim your land.
Claim your land. The land is his. Up till as we are speaking today, if you need a piece of land, you could go to FCDA and get a piece of land. But you also will be told to go and settle the local chief and his people. So there is that primacy. Then we came into the colonial era, where through assertion, our colonial masters, be they British, be they Portuguese, be they French, be they German, were able to come into Africa by the use of force, by the use of the Gatling gun and cannons, were able to suppress us, seize our land, brought in their laws, and led us by those laws. We paid taxes to them. So it's a long culture up until we now copied the colonial masters, because you remember Lord Lugard himself was a colonel.
Yeah, he was a soldier.
He was a soldier.
Yeah.
And most of the provisional leaders were actually soldiers.
Yes.
Okay? And they did it for the crown, remember?
Yes.
So we became historically accultured to power of force. And it became consistent. Nigeria is a young country, actually. We only suffered 62 years of colonialism.
Yes.
Of colonialism.
Yes.
And we are just 60 how many years of independence with several interruptions by the military.
Yeah.
So much so that today, even our politics, even our politicians act a regimented culture. Behind the president's wife stands a police officer.
Yeah.
The president is commander-in-chief.
Yeah.
So a colonel stands behind him. There is a first lady down to the local government area.
Yeah.
Our courts used to be appointed by the sovereign. Especially here in Nigeria, in northern Nigeria, the Alkali system.
Yeah.
The Alkali system
Yes.
was out of the palace.
Yeah.
The Alkali himself is a chief
Yes.
in charge of the judiciary.
In charge of the
Just like you have a chief who is Yari in charge of the prisons.
prisons. Yes.
You have the Sarkin Yaki and the Sarkin Doka.
Yeah.
So it is simply a framework which we have inherited and we are so acculturated to.
Internalized.
But if we are able to nurture our nascent democracy, because the democracy we're in now is basically about 25 years.
Yes, about 25.
About 25 years. And we can see that it is growing.
Okay.
It is growing. And we are realizing that there are areas that are not within the realms of force over time. And I can see a future about 2-3 generations where if we are consistent with our democracy and we are able to reduce foreign interference that makes force even advised to us as a first and enduring solution, then we will be able to ensure that the non-kinetic, going back to your first question again,
Yes.
that the non-kinetic developmental solutions is the most enduring instrument to governance.
Sir, if you could change just one institutional practice, one rule, habit, or incentive that would reduce the likelihood of conflict spiraling, what would it be?
It's for government and those in it to be human, to be able to rule on justice, to build trust. That's essentially what it is. To be selfless and to govern humans not minding religion, race, or whatever, for as much as these are considerations to ensure equity and also to ensure that you know the sensitivities of people and you are able to deal with them as such that they will live in harmony. Leadership is absolutely personalized and it is getting worse, unfortunately. But I always make the reference to the J curve. Okay? The J curve is a book written by it's there on my shelf, which by a graph shows how nations coming out of conflict or democratizing actually slump like in a graph, like a J. But it is up to the extent by which its elites are able to build cohesion on justice and equality that curve is able to rise up again.
A lot of our listeners are young people. So for the young people listening, especially those who are working in media advocacy and community leadership, What is one misconception about security or conflict that you think they need to abandon?
I had spoken about this earlier in one of my interventions, and I think the underlying thing is for all this class of very, very critical and important people that you have mentioned to make education count. I have found that, unfortunately, that the most educated are easily swayed to inordinate sentiments, to unfounded sentiments by which they breathe into society that creates those very, very acidic narratives that divide us. And that when you listen to some no-brainer conversations with intellect, you really wonder, Richard, how people believe
These
things. How really people believe these things. So, my advice to all this class of very critical people, young people should understand that they are the generation that will sustain their nation and their people into several centuries and generations ahead. And it is important for them to sustain and understand that value that is born into them at that demographic. And we also, thankfully, are seeing a cluster among the young people of well-educated, traveled, and privileged youths. Even if they don't get on board airplanes to travel, they travel all over the world over social media. But how much of critical thinking? That is also a problem. The more educated I find people, the less they think critically. So across all these communities, across all these segments of society that are youthful, that you have mentioned, they need to imbibe critical thinking. They should always pause and ask, how truthful, how plausible is this information I am getting? And does it help human sustenance and regeneration? What is the worth of human life if consistently whatever I speak to, whatever action I take is to terminate someone else? Yeah. How do I benefit if the kind of information I develop, that I share, that I believe in, is to exclude further the same person who is already excluded, whose back is already on the ground? Yeah. So this is what I think, without sounding any so intellectual, that we need to begin to think. I always banter with my friends across privileged tribes, that you and I, Richard, we didn't pay the Almighty to make you who you are and throw you into the family, religion, or the community you find yourself. Neither am I. Yeah. So I would rather that I am viewed and dealt with as a human being rather than for what label or identity that I manifest. Yes.
If there is one lesson that runs through this conversation, it is that conflict is rarely sudden and never inevitable. Long before violence erupts, choices are made about land, water, livelihoods, and governance. And just as importantly, choices are made about how these struggles are narrated. For young people, this places a serious responsibility on your shoulders, not to carry the burdens of the state, but to insist on better ways of managing shared resources, better questions about power and accountability, and better stories about coexistence. Environmental pressures will continue to shape our future. Whether it becomes a source of endless conflict or a reason for cooperation between us will depend on how early we pay attention and who is willing to do the quiet, patient work of prevention. Thank you.